Good evening. 7 o'clock. Hope you had a good Wednesday. Good to be here to bring our midweek service. Going to continue tonight talking about the Judges. Of course, we'll be in the book of Judges, and we'll be looking at part 2 tonight of what we started last week of a particular judge. We'll begin with the word of prayer. And OZ, would you lead us in prayer? Judges chapter 7, where we are tonight, talking about Gideon, part 2. Last week we saw where Gideon got the call to be a judge to deliver God's people from the Midianites and the other enemies that they had. And then God chose Gideon. Gideon wanted to have some assurance that God was with him. He would be with him, he would be with the army. And 3 things came about to show Gideon that God's with him. First of all, we had the fire that came up on the rock and consumed the meat that was put on the rock. Well, that wasn't enough for Gideon. He didn't want to put the fleece out. And if the fleece was wet, then that would be assurance that God was with him. And then he wasn't sure about that. Then this time the fleece would be dry and the ground would be wet. And that happened, and that gave Gideon assurance. But now God is going to put Gideon to the test. Gideon wanted assurance from God, and now Gideon's going to be put to the test. Are you going to listen? Are you going to trust in God that he will do what he will do? And what he does here in chapter 7 verse 2, and the Lord said to Gideon, the people who are with you are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hands, lest Israel claim glory for itself against me, saying, my own hand has saved me. So Gideon's got the army together. They're getting ready to go off to battle. But they're too many. 32,000 are just too many people for God to take into battle. Because again, when they are victorious, they may think that, look at our numbers, our mighty numbers have brought this about. So, first thing they do in verse 3, now therefore proclaim in the hearing of the people, saying, whoever is fearful and afraid, let him turn and depart at once from Mount Gilead. And 22,000 the people returned, and 10,000 remained. So he said, if you're scared, go home. And a bunch of them do. 22,000 of them go home. And that leaves 10,000. And of course, that's still too many. And in verse 4, he puts the 10,000 to the test. And the Lord said to Gideon, the people are still too many. Bring them down to the water. I will test them for you there. Then it shall be that of whom I say to you, this one shall go with you, the same shall go with you. And whoever I shall say to you, this one shall not go with you, the same shall not go. Take them to the water. We're going to test them. 5 and 6. So he brought the people down to the water, and the Lord said to Gideon, everyone who laps from the water with his tongue, as a dog laps, you shall set apart by himself. Likewise, everyone who goes down on his knees to drink. And a number of those who lapped, putting their hand to their mouth, was 300 men. But all the rest of the people got down on their knees to drink water. So again, 9,700 are taken out. That leaves 300. If they got down on their belly and drank of the water on their belly, that was it. They're out. If they picked it up with their hand and drank it, well, that's good. And only 300 did it that way. And we see that in verse 7. Then the Lord said to Gideon, by the 300 men who lapped, I will save you and deliver the Midianites to your hand. Let all the other people go, every man to his place. So those 300, they showed a difference by taking the water up in their hand that showed that they were prepared for the enemy. Now, they were looking, not on their belly, but looking. They could look to the right or to the left as they drank, and if the enemy were to come, they would be prepared for that, and that's what God was looking for, those who are always on their guard, ready to do something. And 300 were, and now he will take the 300 into battle with him when that time comes. He tells the 9,700 to go home. You can't hang around here. You got to go home. There's no place for you here, and they go home. Then in verse 8, so the people took provisions and their trumpets in their hands, and he sent away all the rest of Israel, every man to his tent, and retained those 300 men. Now the camp of Midian was below him in the valley. So the 300 are getting ready to go. 9,700 have gone to their tents. No place for them there. In verse 9, it happened on the same night the Lord said to him, "Arise, go down against the camp, for I have delivered it into your hand." So God says, go to battle. But Gideon, 300 against, I think the count was 138,000 of the Midianites and all those others that were there. 300 against 138,000. Common sense says we can't win that war. So now Gideon's having doubts again. So now God's putting him to the test. Are you going to trust me or not? Can I win with 300 or not? And Gideon's thinking, we can't do it. Not with 300 men. As we'll see in a minute, they didn't even have any swords with them. Any kind of weapons to go against the enemy. How are we going to do this? So God hears this. He knows his heart. And in verse 10 and 11, but if you are afraid to go down to the camp of Purah, your servant, with Purah your servant, and you shall hear what they say. And afterwards your hand shall be strengthened to go down against the camp. Then he went down to Purah, with Purah, his servant, to the outposts of the armed men who were in the camp. So Gideon and Purah, they're going to sneak down there and just observe what's going on, what's happening. Verse 12. Now the Midianites and the Amalekites, all the people of the east, were lying in the valley as numerous as locusts, and their camels were without number as the sand by the seashore in the multitude. So they see all this. A lot of people down there, a lot of Midianites, a lot of Amalekites, a lot of folks. 13 and 14. And when Gideon had come, there was a man telling a dream to his companion. He said, I have had a dream. To my surprise, a loaf of barley bread tumbled into the camp of Midian. It came to a tent and struck it so that it fell and overturned, and the tent collapsed. And his companion answered and said, this is nothing else but the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel. And to his hand God has delivered Midian and the whole camp. So Gideon overhears this conversation between these two, warriors, soldiers. And they didn't know that Gideon was listening. They didn't know that God gave him this dream. Didn't know that. So here God was working through them. They didn't even know it. For Gideon to hear. And this barley loaf to an Arab individual, that meant the least of the breads. And that was just trash bread. All the leftovers from the crops and things. And of course, these 300, they were the least. And yet they're going to come into camp here. They're going to destroy the camp. And that's what that one man, he interpreted that dream. Whether he knew it or not, he was interpreting that dream. And sure enough, God is going to do that very thing. And Gideon hears this. And this gives Gideon assurance that, okay, God is going to be with us. And in verse 15, and so it was when Gideon heard the telling of the dream and its interpretation that he worshiped. He returned to the camp of Israel and said, Arise, for the Lord has delivered the camp of Midian into your hand. Gideon's giving God the credit. God has done this. He's doing this. He's already given us the victory. We just got to go take it. And then verse 16, then he divided the 300 men into 3 companies, and he put a trumpet in every man's hand with empty pitchers and torches inside the pitchers. And they're probably thinking, how are we going to do battle? We don't have any weapons. Well, they have a trumpet, and they have a pitcher, and they have a torch. How's that going to defeat 138,000 people? But anyway, they're going to do what he said. 17 and 18. And he said to them, look at me and do likewise. Watch, and when I come to the edge of the camp, you shall do as I do. When I blow the trumpet, I and all who are with me, then you also blow the trumpets on every side of the whole camp, and say, the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. So Gideon says, follow my lead. Watch me. 19 and 20. So Gideon and the 100 men who were with him came to the outpost of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch, just as they had posted the watch. And they blew the trumpets and broke the pitchers that were in their hands. Then the 3 companies blew the trumpets and broke the pitchers. They held the torches in the left hands and the trumpets in their right hands for blowing, and they cried, the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. So all this is happening at one time. The enemy hears the trumpets, hears the pitchers break. They see the flames. They hear the trumpets. They hear the shout. This is the middle of the night. This particular watch, the middle watch, maybe after midnight or so. I don't know what's going on. Total shock. And verse 21, 22. And every man stood in his place all around the camp, and the whole army ran and cried out and fled. When the 300 blew the trumpets, the Lord sent every man's sword against his companion throughout the whole camp. And the army fled to Beth Yucazah toward Zerah, as far as the border of Abel, Meholah, by Tabbath. So all this happens. The pitchers break, the trumpets are blowing, the torches are there, the people are shouting. They don't know who the enemy is, and they throw their own swords and they start killing one another. They don't know who's the enemy, who's on the right side, the wrong side, and they're wiping each other out. And in verse 23, and the men of Israel gathered together from Naphtali, Asher, and Manasseh, and pursued the Midianites. Then Gideon sent messengers throughout all the mountains of Ephraim, saying, come down against the Midianites and seize from them the watering places as far as Beth-barah and Jordan. Then all the men of Ephraim gathered together and seized the watering places as far as Beth-barah and the Jordan. So they got what few are left of the Midianites and Amalekites. They're running. And now Israel's after them. And now they get to all those that were scared, those 22,000, plus maybe the 9,700, plus anyone else that wants to, they're going after them. And they're going to destroy those that are left. And some of these men of Ephraim, the tribe of Ephraim, they go to these watering holes. That's where they're waiting. They wait for these men or somebody thinking they're going to come here to these watering holes and try to get some water for refreshment. Verse 25, and they captured 2 princes of the Midianites, Oreb and Zeb. They killed Oreb at the rock of Oreb, and Zeb they killed at the winepress of Zeb. They pursued Midian and brought the heads of Oreb and Zeb to Gideon on the other side of the Jordan. So they got the kings of these 2 or princes of these two groups, Midianites and Amalekites. They got their heads, they're dead, but the war's not over. There's still a battle going on. And in chapter 8 and verse 1, now the men of Ephraim said to him, why have you done this to us by not calling us when you went to fight with the Midianites? And they reprimanded him sharply. Well, it seemed like they did go to battle. They went by these watering holes, and here comes these princes, and they cut their heads off. But Ephraim wanted more. They wanted to go into battle. Why didn't you invite us to the battle? They wanted to get heavily involved, and it just wasn't enough for them to kill two people. They wanted to do more, and they felt left out. And they get on Gideon for this. You shouldn't have done it this way. Well, Gideon, he gives them some assurance here in verse 2. So he said to them, what have I done now in comparison with you? Is not the gleaning of the grapes of Ephraim better than the vintage of Abiezer? So he uses a comparison. Which is better? Grapes in the field or the wine that comes from the grapes? And of course, the wine that comes from the grapes is the better. And Gideon's saying to those of Ephraim, you have done a great job here. You've taken care of the princes of these groups. You really put them to running. And he's praising them for what they have done. And he gives them credit for this. And Gideon doesn't take any credit. He gives them the credit for what they have done. And that seemed to appease their anger towards Gideon. Like in verse 3, it says, God has delivered into your hands the prince of Midian, Oreb and Zeb. And what was I able to do in comparison with you? Then their anger toward him subsided when he said that. So he really built them up, showed his appreciation, gave them credit for this, probably for the whole victory, in a sense, because they took care of the princes and they didn't have any leaders. That's why they were fleeing. But he gives these Ephraim the praise, and he takes none of it himself. Well, the battle, they're still chasing these people. These people are running everywhere. The Midianites, Amalekites, and they're trying to chase them down. And of course, Israel gets hungry. They want something to eat. The army does. 5 and 6, Judges 8. Then he said to the men of Succoth, please give loaves of bread to the people who follow me, for they are exhausted. And I am pursuing Zebal and Zalmunna, king of Midian. And the leaders of Succoth said, are the hands of Zebal and Zalmunna now in your hand that we should give bread to your army? So this Succoth, this country of Succoth, they want to make sure that they're going to be on the right side, who won. They didn't know who's going to win this battle. So they said, we're not going to give anybody any bread until we know who's going to be the victor in this. So they're just playing their hand here. Want to make sure that they're going to feed the right one. You didn't want to give nourishment to Israel and then they get defeated, and then the Midianites come and jump on them. And this makes Gideon mad, what they have said here. In verse 7. So Gideon said, for this cause, when the Lord has delivered Sabaoth and Zalmunna into my hand, then I will tear your flesh with the thorns of the wilderness and with briars. He's coming back after them. He's like Arnold Schwarzenegger, I'll be back. He's coming back. He's going to show them just who is victorious. So he leaves. They go to another area. And about the same thing happens, verse 8 and 9. Then he went up from there to Peniel, and spoke to them in the same way. And the men of Peniel answered him as the men of Succoth had answered. Get some water. Verse 9, he also spoke to the men of Peniel, saying, when I come back in peace, I will tear down this tower. So Peniel here, they wouldn't help him. He told them, when I come back, there'll be nothing left of this place. This tower that you think so highly of is coming down to the ground. Verse 16. So he took the elders of the city. Well, between 9 and 16, they're victorious. They catch up with the Midianites, the Amalekites. They wipe them out. Now they're going back home. They're going to stop by these two places. They wouldn't feed them. And he took the elders of the city and thorns of the wilderness and briars. And with them he taught the men of Succoth. And then he tore down the tower of Peniel and killed the men of the city. So he did exactly what he said he was going to do. He just wiped them out, destroyed them for not giving them nourishment, army when they needed it. 18 and 19. And he said to Zebal and to Zemullah, what kind of men were they whom you killed at Tabor? So they answered, as you are, so were they. Each one resembled the son of a king. Then he said, they were my brothers, the sons of my mother. As the Lord lives, if you had let them live, I would not kill you. So these kings of these two places, Succoth and the other one, Peniel, he goes to these kings. And remember when you killed these guys? And probably when they were living in the caves and everywhere hiding from the enemy, and they would attack, those guys you killed were my brothers. And because you killed them, I'm going to kill you. And he does. He takes their life as well because of their actions. When everybody's back in Israel and they're happy, in verse 22 and 23, then the men of Israel said to Gideon, rule over us, both you and your son, and your grandson also, for you have delivered us from the hand of Midian. But Gideon said to them, I will not rule over you, nor shall my son rule over you. The Lord shall rule over you. Good move on Gideon's part. He's not going to be the leader. He's going to let God be the leader. If they'd have kept that and not wanting the king later on, things would have been much better. So Gideon tells them it's not going to happen. God's going to lead us. But Gideon has a request in verse 24. Then Gideon said to them, I would like to make a request of you that each of you give me the earrings from his plunder. They had gold earrings because they were Ishmaelites. So when they defeated the enemy and killed these soldiers, they took all the jewelry off of them. And Gideon's wanting just the earrings. He's wanting to make something. In verse 27, then Gideon made it into an ephod, and set it up in his city, Ophrah. And all Israel played the harlot with it there. It became a snare to Gideon and to his house. So he makes his coat made of gold. It's more than just a coat. It weighed about 70 pounds. I forgot how many of them. how much it weighed, they told here. And it went too far. And all of a sudden, the people began to worship it, for whatever reason. And even Gideon, over time, I'm sure he didn't start out that way, but over time, in his 40 years there, even he began to worship it somehow. So even God's greatest leaders sometimes can stumble, and they can begin to do things that they know are wrong. And Gideon is an example of that. And some of these judges are that way. But for 40 years, everything was good. They had peace in Israel. And as we'll see next week, Gideon dies, somebody else comes in. And when Gideon dies, they go right back to their old ways. And they are beginning to get overtaken by the enemy. And they cry out to God, and here comes a new judge to deliver them. So that's the story of Gideon. And thing about God, he tells us the good and the bad, everything about him. He was a great man, a great leader, but he had that one little flaw here. And maybe he saw the error of his way toward the end. Maybe he did. But let's remember him for the good that he did, and the leader of God's people, and doing what God said, how God said to do it. Anything on Gideon? All right, about time for the bell. We'll end here and take up next week.